The legacy of Charley Patton. All right, music lovers, gather around. Today we're heading way back before the electric guitar, before rock and roll set the world on fire, back to the dusty roads of juke joints of the Mississippi Delta. If you want to talk about the roots of rock, you got to talk about the blues. And if you want to talk about the blues, there's only one man who laid down the foundation. Charley Patton, the father of the Delta blues, didn't just play music, he lived it, breathed it, and left a legacy that shaped the biggest names in rock history. Buckle up, folks, because we're diving into the life, music, and lasting influence of the man who made the blues roar. Now let's take a trip back to the late 1800s. That's right, rock's story doesn't start in the 60s. It starts deep in the heart of the Mississippi, where Charley Patton was born around 1891. Though no one's quite sure of the exact date, this is the time when music wasn't just entertainment, it was survival. And for black musicians in the South, the blues was the soundtrack of their lives. Patton grew up on the Dockery Plantation, a place that would become legendary in blues history. It wasn't just a farm, it was a melting pot of musical influence. Field workers sang spirituals and work songs, passing rhythms and melodies from generation to generation. And right there, soaking it all in, was young Charley Patton. Dockery wasn't just plantation, it was a gathering place for black musicians. It's said that some of the greatest blues pioneers passed through there, including Son House, Robert Johnson, and Howlin' Wolf. Imagine being a kid surrounded by the sound of guitars ringing through the hot Mississippi air, the stomping of feet on dusty porches, and the deep, mournful voices singing of hardship and hope. That was Patton's upbringing, and it shaped everything he would become. As a teenager, Patton learned guitar and soon developed a style unlike anything people had heard before. He didn't just play the blues, he attacked the guitar, beat it like a drum, made it talk, cry and shout. His deep growling voice told stories of hardship, dangerous women, and life on the road, and oh boy, did he know about life on the road. The blues wasn't just music in those days, it was survival. Life in the Jim Crow South was brutal for black Americans. Segregation, poverty, and oppression were everyday realities, and the blues became a way to express the pain, the resilience, and the hope that people carried inside them. Patton's songs weren't just tunes, they were testimonies, documenting the struggles of a people fighting to be heard. Picture this: long dirt roads, a humid southern night, and a young Charley Patton sitting on a wooden porch with a guitar, watching the sun sink behind the cotton fields. He wasn't just learning chords, he was learning life. By the time he was in his late teens, Patton had become a local legend. People travelled from far and wide to hear him play. Unlike many blues musicians who stuck to one plantation or town, Patton was a drifter. He took his music wherever it was needed, playing for sharecroppers, gamblers, and moonshiners in juke joints and makeshift dance halls. His reputation grew, and he soon wasn't just another bluesman. He was the bluesman. His songs spoke of the world he knew. Pony Blues was one of his most famous recordings, captures the restless spirit of a man always on the move. High Water Everywhere tells the story of the Great Mississippi Flood of 1927, a disaster that placed thousands and hit black communities the hardest. These weren't just songs, they were history lessons, carrying the voices of the unheard into the future. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Patton didn't just play the blues, he lived them. He was known for his wild lifestyle and always traveling, always playing and always stirring up trouble. He was the original rock star before rock and roll even existed. Patton wasn't just a traveling musician, he was a showman. He played guitar behind his back, between his legs, even threw his guitar into the air and caught it mid-song. Sound familiar? That's because the theatrics of rock and roll started right there. Before Chuck Berry's Duck Walk, before Jimi Hendrix's flaming guitar, Patton was out there electrifying audiences, even though all he had was a wooden acoustic guitar and his voice. So here's the big question. How does a man with no internet, no radio play, no record label become one of the most influential musicians of all time? The answer is simple. Word of mouth. And a sound so powerful that people couldn't forget it. Even before he made his first recording, Patton was a legend in the blues community. His music spread not just through performances but through the musicians he mentored. He was a teacher to Son House, who in turn influenced Muddy Waters. And Muddy Waters, well, without him there's no Rolling Stones, no Led Zeppelin, no rock as we know it. Think about that for a second. One man sitting on a wooden porch with his guitar playing for a handful of people ended up shaping the sound of a generation. That, my friends, is the power of the blues. But let's not forget, life as a traveling bluesman wasn't easy. Patton was constantly on the move, not just because he loved performing, but because he had to. The Jim Crow South wasn't safe for a black man who played by his own rules. Blues musicians were often harassed, cheated out of their pay, and sometimes even ran out of town, but it didn't stop Patton. He kept playing, kept moving, kept pushing the boundaries of what the blues could be. So let's set the scene again. It's the 1920s, and here comes Charley Patton striding into town with his guitar slung over his back. People rush to the juke joint because they know when Patton plays, it's not just a show, it's an experience. By the late 1920s, Patton finally got his chance to record. He travelled to Richmond, Indiana, where he recorded some of his most famous tracks for Paramount Records. Those recordings, crackly and raw, carried his music beyond the Mississippi Delta. Suddenly, people in cities like Chicago and New York were hearing the Delta blues for the first time. Those records planted the seeds for what became rock and roll. And there it is, folks, the domino of the chain reaction that led to rock music. One man, one guitar, a voice full of fire, and a sound that would never die. Even before he became a recording artist, Patton never stopped traveling. He played until his health started failing in the mid-1930s, but his music, that was just getting started. Long after his death in 1934, his influence continued to spread, reaching across decades and continents, shaping the very foundation of rock. So the next time you hear a rock music that gives you chills, remember, before rock, before electric guitars, before the stadium shows and screaming fans, there was Charley Patton, strumming away on a wooden porch, changing the world one note at a time. Now let me tell you something. Charley Patton wasn't just a musician, he was a showman. Before Elvis Presley shook his hips, before Hendrix set fire to his guitar, Patton was out there wooing crowds with tricks that made him look like a magician with 6 strings. He played behind his back, between his legs, and even he'd throw his guitar up in the air and catch it mid-song. People say he could make his guitar sound like 2 instruments at once, laying down rhythm and melody at the same time. Sound familiar? That's because rockers like Chuck Berry, Keith Richards and Jimi Hendrix all took a page from Patton's book. But Patton wasn't just about tricks. His entire presence was larger than life. When he stepped on stage, whether it was a dusty juke joint or a front porch gathering, people knew they were about to witness something unforgettable. He had a way of captivating audiences, drawing them in with his powerful growling voice and his ability to make the guitar weep, shout and dance all at once. Picture this: smoky air, the scent of moonshine in the back, and the clatter of boots on wooden floors. The crowd leans in as Patton strums the first note, and in an instant he's got them under his spell. Patton's energy was unmatched. He didn't just stand there and strum. He stomped his feet, moved his entire body with rhythm, and even let out sudden whelps that sent chills down people's spines. It wasn't just music, it was an event, a spectacle, something that kept people talking long after the last note had faded into the Mississippi night. Patton didn't just play one place. He took the blues on the road. He performed at house parties, in backwoods juke joints, and anywhere people were willing to listen. His songs weren't just about lost love, they were about real life floods, prison, racism, and rebellion. And that rebellious streak, that's the heartbeat of rock and roll. You see, Patton wasn't just playing for fun. He was playing to tell the truth. His lyrics were stories, warnings, and something even outright defiance. He had a knack for writing about things other musicians wouldn't dare touch. That high water everywhere, for example, that wasn't just a song, it was a documentary, a first-hand account of the Great Mississippi Flood of 1927. Patton wasn't just entertaining people, he was educating them, preserving history in song form, giving a voice to those who had none. Sound familiar, doesn't it? That's the same spirit you hear in Bob Dylan's protest songs, in Bruce Springsteen's blue-collar anthems, in punk rock's raw defiance. Patton laid the foundation brick by brick. And let's talk about his vocal delivery. He had a voice that commanded attention, gritty, raw, and dripping with intensity. It wasn't pretty, but it was the point. Rock singers later picked up on this ditching smooth croning for something that sounded real, something that hit you right in the guts. Janis Joplin, Bob Dylan, and even Kurt Cobain owe a little something to Patton's unapologetic vocal style. Now here's the kicker. Patton didn't have the luxury of microphones and amplifiers like today's rock stars. He had to be loud. He had to project his voice over raucous crowds and noisy juke joints. That kind of raw, powerful singing influenced generations of vocalists to come. Patton's recordings, though limited by the technology of the time, captured that intensity. Songs like Spoonful Blues and A Spoonful of Blues weren't just catchy melodies, they were performances. You can hear his voice bending and stretching almost like he's on the verge of breaking. That kind of raw emotional delivery, that's something every great rock singer strives for. And let's not forget the blues. It wasn't just music, it was survival. It was a way for black musicians to carve out a space in the world that didn't want to hear them. And Patton made sure they heard him loud and clear. This rebellious spirit is something that carried directly into rock and roll. Think about the legends: Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Elvis Presley, the Rolling Stones. They all had that edge, that attitude, that need to break the rules and shake things up. And who did they learn that from? Charley Patton. Patton didn't wait for permission to be great. He didn't ask for the spotlight, he took it. And that, my friends, is the very essence of rock and roll. Patton's influence stretched far beyond the Delta. His wild playing style and charismatic performances inspired not just the bluesmen who came after him, but the entire structure of popular music. Without Patton, there's no Muddy Waters. Without Muddy Waters, there's no Rolling Stones. Without the Rolling Stones, well, you get the idea. So the next time you listen, you see a guitar slide across the stage, and next time you hear a singer wail about life depends on it, remember, Charley Patton did it first. He set the standard and the world followed. All right. So we know Charley Patton was a wild performer, but what about his sound? Let's break it down. If you listen closely, you can hear the DNA of rock music in his recordings. Patton was one of the first to use the boogie rhythm, a driving rhythmic guitar style that made people want to move. Sound familiar? That same boogie groove would later fuel rock legends like John Lee Hooker, Bo Diddley, and even AC/DC. His aggressive percussive strumming, that's the backbone of rock rhythm guitar. Picture a packed juke joint on Saturday night, dust rising from the wooden floor, bodies swaying, the air thick with the heat and the scent of whiskey, and there's Patton, guitar in hand, hammering away at those strings like a man possessed. The rhythm was infectious, impossible to ignore. That, my friends, is the primal force of rock and roll taking shape. Patton's rhythm playing was a force of nature. He wasn't just strumming chords, he was laying down a foundation, building a groove that demanded movement. His style had a hypnotic effect, looping rhythms that locked the listener into creating an unstoppable energy. That energy, that urgency, that's the same pulse that would later drive rock classics like Chuck Berry's Johnny B. Good and Rolling Stones' Jumping Jack Flash. And let's talk about his voice. It was rough, raw, and full of grit, just like the blues itself. It wasn't polished pop singing. That was a man pouring his soul into every note. Rock vocalists from Howlin' Wolf to Janis Joplin took inspiration from raw emotional delivery. You can hear a voice that grabs you by the collar and refuses to let go. That's Patton. He didn't just sing the blues, he lived them. And you could hear every ounce of hardship, defiance, and resilience in his voice. It was raw, it was unfiltered, and it was real. Patton's delivery wasn't just about sounding good, it was about storytelling. He could switch from gravelly groan to an impassioned howl, and in an instant, making you feel the weight of every lyric. It wasn't theatrical, emotional, and unforgettability. That ability to tell a story through voice alone, that became a key element in rock singing, influencing everybody from Robert Plant to Kurt Cobain. And if you think Patton was just about rhythm, think again, because his lead guitar work was just as revolutionary. Into the slide guitar. Patton's slide guitar playing, that's a whole other story. Using a bottleneck slide, he could make his guitar wail like a crying spirit. That technique became a staple for rockers like Jewel Alman, Eric Clapton, and even modern inspired artists like Jack White. You know, that eerie, almost ghostly wail of the slide guitar, that's blues, and it's at its purest, and Patton was the first to master it. When he ran that bottleneck up and down the strings, it was like his guitar was speaking its own language. It was full of emotion, sometimes sorrowful, sometimes ecstatic, but always powerful. Slide guitar didn't just stay in the blues, it became a cornerstone of rock sound. The way Patton used it to blend notes and add expression directly inspired legends like Elmore James, who turned it into screaming electric slide. Heard in Dust My Broom. From there, it travelled straight into rock history, showing up in Led Zeppelin, in The Time of Dying, Rolling Stones, Love in Vain, and countless other classics. So here's the deal. Without Patton's slide guitar, you don't get to know the Allman Brothers Band. You don't get George Harrison's legendary slide solos. You don't get that aching, bending, crying guitar sound that defines so much of rock's inspirational moments. But it wasn't just about what he played, it was about how he played it. Patton was aggressive, fearless. He slapped his guitar, he plucked it with force, creating precise effects that made acoustic guitar sound larger than life. It was this approach that gave early rock and roll that its bite. Listen to Patton's song when put on early rock and roll. That sharp, choppy rhythm, that driving force, That's no coincidence. That's the blueprint. The blueprint was already there. And let's not forget, Patton wasn't just shaping rock with playing. His songwriting laid the foundation for the rebellious spirit that rock would emerge. His lyrics weren't about heartbreak and weren't just about heartbreak and hard times. They were about survival, about standing up to the world that was often cruel and unforgiving. He sang about the floodwaters rising, about men on the run, about struggles of black life in the Jim Crow South. And rock and roll, it took that defiance and ran with it. You want rebellion? Look no further than Charley Patton's. Before rock musicians were breaking the rules, he was already doing it. With his lyrics and his playing and his entire way of being, Patton was the first blues musician to create songs that felt like fully fledged experiences. His music was immersive. You didn't just listen, you felt it. That energy, that passion, that became the core of rock music. So let's set the record straight. Rock and roll wasn't born in the 50s. It started decades earlier in the hands of Charley Patton. He didn't just play the blues, he shaped the sound that would become rock. So the next time you hear a rock guitar shredding on a slide, the next time you hear the pulse of a driving rhythm guitar, the next time a singer's raw, gut-wrenching vocal gives you the chills, remember where it all came from. That sound, that soul, that fire. It started with Charley Patton. Fast forward to the 60s, and here's where things get really interesting. The blues didn't stay in the Mississippi Delta. It hopped across the Atlantic. British musicians discovered these old blues records, and man, did they run with it. By the early 1960s, a new generation of musicians in Britain were obsessed with American blues. That gritty, raw sound of Charley Patton, Robert Johnson and Son House had a profound impact on young guitarists and vocalists who were looking for something different from the polished pop tunes dominating the airwaves. The British blues explosion was about to take off, and at the heart of it all was Patton's unmistakable influence. The Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin and the Yardbirds all took inspiration from Patton's raw sound. Keith Richards has said that without Charley Patton, there'll be no Stones. That grit, that energy, that realness, Patton planted the seed and rock and roll grew from it. Imagine being a teenager in post-war England, hearing those crackly old blues records for the first time. It wasn't just music, it was a revolution. A revelation. Those kids had never heard anything so raw, so primal, so alive, and they knew they had to play it. Mick Jagger and Keith Richards bonded over their love of the blues, and the Rolling Stones made it their mission to bring that sound to the world. Their early albums were packed with blues covers, and their swaggering, rebellious style owed just as much to Patton as it did to Muddy Waters. The same goes for Eric Clapton, who studied those Delta blues records like sacred texts, eventually crafting his own blues-infused rock with Cream and later in his solo career. But let's talk about one of the biggest blues rock powerhouses of all time, Led Zeppelin. Jimmy Page wasn't just influenced by the blues, he was obsessed by it. You can hear that obsession all over Zeppelin's music. Songs like When the Levee Breaks and Traveling Roadside Blues are direct tributes to the Delta blues, legends with Patton's DNA running through every note. Robert Plant's wailing vocals, the slide guitar flourishes and the heavy stomping rhythms, those are all elements that trace back to Patton's recordings. And let's not forget the Yardbirds. Before Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page became rock gods. They were blues fanatics playing the music of their heroes. Their energetic, feedback-laden style was a direct evolution of the raw, aggressive playing that Patton pioneered decades earlier. But the blues explosion wasn't just happening in Britain. Across the Atlantic, American musicians were rediscovering their own roots. Young artists like Jimi Hendrix, The Doors, and even Bob Dylan were digging deep into the blues archive, absorbing the spirit of the Delta and infusing it in their own unique styles. Ever heard Hendrix play the blues? It's like listening to a direct descendant of Patton, wild, unchained, full of fire. When Hendrix shredded through Red House or Voodoo Child, he wasn't just playing licks, he was channeling the ghosts of the Delta. Even today, artists like the Black Keys and Gary Clark Jr. keep that Patton spirit alive. His influence was woven into every blues rock riff, every screaming solo, every beat that makes you stomp your foot. The Black Keys' gritty, stripped down sound feels like something that could have been played in the 1920s juke joint. Gary Clark Jr.'s fusion of rock and blues echoes the same rebellious, high-energy approach that Patton pioneered nearly a century ago. And here's the thing, rock isn't done with the blues, not even close. Every generation of musicians finds their way back to the old recordings, back to the raw, untamed energy that started it all. The blues is inescapable in rock, whether it's Jack White's bringing his blistering slide guitar work into the White Stripes, or Greta Van Fleet's channeling the bluesy bombast of Zeppelin. The influence of Charlie Parker and his peers is everywhere. So the next time you crank up the rock song and feel the pulse, that edge, that bite, know that it started with a man, a guitar, and a voice that refused to be ignored. That's the legacy of Charlie Parker. So here's the deal. Charlie Parker didn't just play the blues, he was the blues. He lived it, shaped it, and passed it down to generations of musicians who built rock and roll from the ground up. His music wasn't just entertainment, it was raw, real, and revolutionary, and that, my friends, is why his legacy will not ever die. Patton's influence stretched far beyond the Mississippi Delta. His sound, style, and sheer presence continue to shape music industry today, from the electrified blues rock of the 1960s to modern-day alternative garage bands and even heavy metal. Echoes of Patton's voice and guitar are everywhere. His foot-stomping rhythms, slide guitar techniques, and fierce vocal delivery set the foundation for artists spanning decades. Think about it. How many artists have we talked about today? The Stones, Zeppelin, Hendrix, the Black Keys. But guess what? They're just the tip of the iceberg. Every time a guitarist blends a note in a bluesy solo, every time a singer growls out a raw emotional lyric, every time a song carries that driving, foot-stomping rhythm, Charlie Patton's legacy is alive and kicking. And the best part? It's still evolving. New artists are finding ways to take those blues roots and turning them into something fresh, keeping the spirit of Patton alive for a new generation of listeners. Even before the blues festivals ever walked into a smoky bar and heard a band tearing through a slide guitar solo, that's Patton's spirit alive and well right there in front of you. Even before rock and roll, Patton's influence seeps into country, folk, hip-hop, and even electric music. Sampled blues riffs show up in modern-day hip-hop tracks. Indie bands weave in Delta blues storytelling, and country legends still tip their hats to the man who helped define American music. In fact, artists like Jack White, Racketeers, and Alabama Shakes owe a massive debt to Patton's raw energy and fearless approach to performance. Jack White's stripped-down raw blues rock work is a direct descendant of Patton's pioneering style. So let's get one thing straight. Patton wasn't just a blues man, he was a revolutionary. He didn't just play music, he tore down walls, broke traditions, and set the world on fire with 6 strings and a voice full of soul. Take Gary Clark Jr., for example. He's one of the most electrifying blues artists today, blending the raw power of Patton's Delta blues with modern rock and hip-hop edge. His Bright Lights has the same story. His hit Bright Lights has the same storytelling depth and haunting blues grit that defined Patton music nearly a century ago. And then there's fantastic Negretto, who mixed blues, rock and funk in a way that echoes Patton's experimental approach to rhythm and melody. And let's not forget about Rival Sons. These guys bring a modern hard rock twist to blues-based music, channeling the heavy, deep groove that Patton pioneered back in the juke joints of the Mississippi. Blues rock bands like Greta Van Fleet and Marcus King Band continue to evolve the genre while maintaining the same primal energy and raw passion. Greta Van Fleet's Safari song and Highway tune both carry the spirit of Patton's driving, aggressive playing, while Marcus King's soulful voice and blistering guitar solos embody the blues at its finest. You ever listen to a song and feel that unshakable connection, like the music just gets you? That's the blues, baby. That's Patton. He wasn't just making records, he was building a foundation for everything that came after. And here's the real magic. Patton's story never really ended. And as long as there's music, and as long as people pick up guitars and sing their truths, his spirit will keep roaring through the speakers. The beauty of Patton's influence is that it's not locked in the past. New artists continue to discover his work, draw inspiration from it, and shape their own sounds. The next generation of blues and rock musicians is already out there, carrying the torch, keeping the fire burning bright. And you, my friend, are part of this too. Every time you share a blues track, every time you introduce somebody to the sound of the Delta, every time you dig into the roots of rock, you're keeping the legacy alive. And that's the wrap. Keep those records spinning, keep the blues alive, and never forget, the roots of rock and roll run deep in the Delta. Until next time, keep it loud, keep it raw, and keep it real.